Before dawn on the 29th.
Before dawn on the 29th of May, 1453, Ottoman cannon had already battered Constantinople for 53 days. Earlier attacks had failed. The surviving defenders still crowded around the damaged land walls. Then the Janissaries advanced. They were the Sultan's salaried household infantry, disciplined, permanent, and held back for the decisive pressure. They did not take the city alone. Artillery, sailors, engineers, cavalry, irregular troops, and overwhelming manpower had made the assault possible. But centuries earlier, the emperors of this same city had trusted another foreign elite. Those men came from Northern Europe, carried enormous axes, and became known as the Varangian Guard. Between them lies the central rule of this story. The most feared soldiers were rarely terrifying because of one weapon. Their training, organization, and tactics created a battlefield problem their enemies did not yet know how to solve. But no answer remains secret forever. This is not a ranking across 5 centuries. Fear changed by region and generation, and the word unit here includes guards, military orders, and specialized troop systems, not only modern regiments. You may be wondering where Viking berserkers fit into this story. Medieval texts describe warriors fighting in extraordinary fury, but the popular image of organized, drug-crazed shock troops goes much further than the evidence allows. The better documented northern elite served in Constantinople. Around the end of the 10th century, Emperor Basil II received thousands of Rus warriors who helped him defeat internal rivals. They became the core of the Varangian Guard. Many early recruits were Scandinavian. After the Norman conquest, Anglo-Saxon exiles also joined. Their foreign origin was useful. Men with few local family alliances were less likely to disappear into Byzantine palace politics. The Varangians guarded the emperor and entered battle where the fighting was most dangerous. Byzantine writers associated them with heavy, two-handed axes, but the system behind the weapon mattered more. They were highly paid professionals attached directly to the throne. At Dyrrhachium in 1081, that aggression revealed its limit. The Varangians drove forward against Robert Guiscard's Normans, became separated from the Byzantine army, and were counterattacked. The willingness to close that made them feared became fatal when pursuit destroyed cohesion. Before we continue, my name is Noah. We built this channel for people who want the real story behind history's most legendary warriors, not just the version created by movies and myths. If that sounds like you, subscribe. It is free and it helps us make better videos. All right. The Normans who defeated the Varangians had begun as descendants of Scandinavian settlers in northern France. By the 11th century, Norman warriors were conquering territory from England to Sicily. Their mounted knights became the most visible part of their reputation. But their advantage was not a magical cavalry charge. At Hastings, William's army used archers, infantry, and cavalry in repeated attacks against the English shield wall. Some defenders were drawn downhill by retreats that may have been partly planned and partly genuine. Norman cavalry needed firm ground, room to regroup, and an enemy formation beginning to break. Its danger came from attacking, withdrawing, reorganizing, and striking again, while commanders searched for the weak point. When victory was followed by castles, garrisons, and political ambition, one successful battle could become a new kingdom. The military orders made that permanence institutional. The Templars in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Teutonic Knights in the Baltic were not made entirely of noble knights. Their organizations included sergeants, specialists, priests, and administrators. Their advantage was a network of rules, fortified bases, property, money, supplies, and men whose service did not end after one feudal campaign. Estates far from the frontier could finance horses, castles, and reinforcements. Experienced survivors, they were usually only a small part of a larger army, but commanders could expect that core to remain organized when temporary contingents began to fragment. The lesson was simple. Discipline could make a small elite feel larger than it was, but reputation could not alter numbers, terrain, or command. But Hatton devastated the Templars, and Grunwald crushed the Teutonic Order. Permanent organization could magnify strength. It could not rescue exhaustion, encirclement, or a disastrous position. By the early 13th century, the armored knight had become the most intimidating weapon on the European battlefield. Then an army arrived that refused to stand still long enough to be charged. The Mongols did not conquer because they were an undisciplined horde. Their army was organized through a decimal structure. 10 men formed the smallest group, then came units of hundreds and thousands. A two-man was nominally 10,000, although real formations were not always at full strength. This structure did more than simplify counting. It gave commanders units that could separate, receive orders, and recombine without becoming a collection of private warbands. Commanders could move columns by different routes across enormous distances and concentrate them at the chosen moment. Each mounted warrior might travel with several horses, changing mounts to preserve speed. Scouts and intelligence moved ahead of the main force. Signals, messengers, and strict command allowed units to coordinate maneuvers that looked chaotic to the enemy, but were anything but. And the Mongols adapted. Conquered engineers and specialists supplied siege knowledge, machines, and technical skills. An army famous for open country cavalry learned how to reduce fortified cities as well. The composite bow gave Mongol horse archers power while moving. They could attack from a distance, refuse close combat, and exhaust a slower army. Then came the most dangerous part. A Mongol force might appear to panic and retreat. Knights or infantry would pursue, convinced the battle had already been won. Their formation stretched. Their support fell behind. Then the fleeing riders turned, fresh units appeared on the flanks, and victory became encirclement. At the Kalka River in 1223, Mongol commanders drew a Rus and Kuman army into a long pursuit. The allied force became divided before the Mongols turned and destroyed it. At the Sajo River in Hungary 18 years later, Batu and Subutai again avoided the simple battle their opponents expected. While part of the Mongol army fought around a defended crossing, other forces crossed elsewhere and attacked from new directions. The Hungarian camp became a trap. These victories looked sudden only to the men caught inside them. The Mongols had usually begun winning through scouting, route planning, and deception long before the main lines met. Fear also moved ahead of the army. Cities heard what had happened to places that resisted. Some surrendered before the first arrow was fired. Terror was not separate from Mongol strategy. It reduced the number of sieges they had to fight, but the system had limits. Horses required pasture. Operational speed depended on space, remounts, intelligence, and disciplined command. Fortifications, difficult terrain, supply problems, and enemies who refused the pursuit could reduce its advantages. The Mongols appeared to be the final answer to medieval warfare. Then another military elite met them with mounted archery, disciplined cavalry, and a retreat of its own. The Mamluks began as military slaves. Young men, many from the Turkic steppe or the Caucasus, were bought or captured, converted to Islam, trained intensively, and eventually freed while remaining tied to the military household that had created them. The system was coercive. It separated recruits from their original families and remade them inside a military household. It was also designed to produce warriors whose identity, status, and future depended on military skill. Mamluk training included riding, care of horses, archery from the saddle, the lance, close combat, and coordinated maneuver. They could fight at range like steppe cavalry, then close with the weight of more heavily equipped horsemen. By 1260, the Mongols had taken Baghdad and advanced through Syria. Their commander Hulagu then withdrew much of his force after the death of the Great Khan, leaving a smaller but still formidable army under Kitbuka. The Mamluk Sultan Qutuz marched from Egypt with Baybars and met it at Ain Jalut. Accounts describe the Mamluks drawing the Mongols into an engagement with a controlled retreat before reserves struck. The exact battlefield sequence is reconstructed from later sources, but the result is clear. Kitbuka's army was defeated and he was killed. Ain Jalut did not destroy the Mongol Empire. It defeated one regional Mongol army at a moment when much of Hulagu's force was elsewhere. But it stopped the immediate advance towards Egypt and helped the Mamluks recover Syria. More importantly, it showed that Mongol methods could be understood, matched, and turned back. The feared force had met an enemy trained in a related military world. In Western Europe, another battlefield problem was being solved from the ground. English and Welsh longbowmen did not carry a supernatural weapon. Good plate armor could resist many arrows, especially at distance. The danger came from trained men firing together. A powerful longbow required years of physical conditioning and practice. An experienced archer could shoot far faster than most crossbowmen, and thousands of arrows arriving together could wound horses, find gaps, force men to lower their heads, and disrupt the rhythm of an advance. At Crécy and later at Agincourt, English armies chose ground that narrowed the enemy's options. Archers worked beside dismounted men-at-arms. At Agincourt, wooden stakes helped protect them from cavalry, while mud and crowding exhausted the French advance. The arrows did not need to pass through every breastplate. They needed to break order. A horse hit in an unprotected area could fall. A man knocked down in mud could be trapped beneath others. A formation compressed by terrain could lose the room required to use weapons effectively. The longbow was not a medieval machine gun. It was part of a combined defensive system built around terrain, preparation, mass shooting, close support, and commanders disciplined enough to make the enemy attack on their terms. If cavalry reached archers in open ground, the advantage could disappear quickly. Bows also demanded an enormous supply of arrows and a culture of training that could not be created in a few months. The force that finally shattered the prestige of mounted knights was not another cavalry elite. It was infantry moving towards them. The armies of the Swiss Confederacy became famous in the late Middle Ages for dense formations built around pikes and halberds. A pike wall could stop cavalry, but the Swiss made it offensive. Deep columns advanced rapidly, maintaining enough cohesion to present a forest of points while closing with the enemy. The front ranks fixed the opponent. Halberdiers and men with shorter weapons could exploit disorder at closer range. Drums, banners, and officers helped separate columns support one another instead of becoming one motionless block. During the Burgundian Wars, Charles the Bold possessed wealth, cavalry, artillery, and one of Europe's most sophisticated courts. At Morat, in 1476, Swiss forces struck the Burgundian army and turned retreat into collapse. The following year, Charles was killed after another defeat at Nancy. Burgundian power never recovered in the same form. The lesson traveled quickly. Infantry did not have to wait behind a wall for knights to attack. With discipline and momentum, it could seize the initiative. But pikes only worked while the formation held. Broken ground, flanking attacks, artillery, and firearms could turn a dense column into a target. The Swiss answer was powerful, not permanent. And that brings us back to Constantinople. The Janissaries emerged during the 14th century as salaried household infantry tied directly to the Ottoman Sultan. Their recruitment changed over time. Early members came through military slavery and captivity. The later Devshirme system levied Christian boys from Ottoman territories, converted them to Islam, and trained selected recruits for service to the dynasty. Like the Mamluk system, this rested on coercion. Like the Varangian Guard, it also aimed to create men whose careers depended on the ruler rather than local aristocratic families. The Janissaries lived under central discipline, received regular pay, and formed a permanent infantry corps in a world where many armies were still assembled for individual campaigns. They began as archers and increasingly adopted gunpowder weapons during the 15th century, without abandoning older weapons overnight. Yet they were never the entire Ottoman army. Ottoman victories depended on cavalry, irregular infantry, engineers, artillery, logistics, and commanders able to combine them. At Constantinople, giant cannon damaged the walls, ships pressured the city, and repeated assaults exhausted the defenders before the Janissaries entered the final attack. Their importance came from being a reliable center inside that larger system. Troops the Sultan could keep under direct control and commit when discipline mattered most. The city, once protected by foreign axe-bearers, now fell to an empire whose elite household infantry belonged to the age of gunpowder. That did not make the Janissaries permanently invincible. In later centuries, the privileges and political power of the corps would create new problems for the rulers it served. But in 1453, they represented the direction medieval warfare had been moving all along, towards permanent forces, central finance, combined arms, and states able to train soldiers before the emergency began. The Varangians trusted the axe. The Normans trusted the charge. The military orders trusted permanent discipline. The Mongols trusted mobility and command. The Mamluks learned to answer them on horseback. The longbowmen trusted massed fire. The Swiss trusted cohesion. and the Janissaries stood at the edge of a new age of professional infantry and gunpowder. None of them was invincible. Each looked unstoppable only while its enemies continued fighting the kind of war it had already mastered. The moment someone discovered the answer, fear changed sides.